go about this session productively. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists for tonight. I'll start with my right side, Patricia Nanteza, the science communication specialist from Uganda, who works with the National Agricultural Research Laboratories. Next to Patricia is George Yanda, who works with the Boyce Thompson Institute as an adjunct professor, plant biology section at Cornell University School of Integrative Plant Science. Next to George is Alison, who has also been part of the movie, and she's a cooperative extension specialist, animal genomics and biotech, Department of Animal Science at UC Davis. Next to Alison is Paul Debbie, who is the Director of Technology Transfer and Licensing, Boyce Thompson Institute. And last but not least is Clet Wandui Masiga, a conservation biologist, genetist, and a farmer from Tropical Institute of Development Innovations, Uganda. Please join me and give another round of applause for all our panel discussants. So the kick-off question to you all is, what do you find to be the most important message conveyed by the film? Thank you.
Thank you, Nasib. Good evening, everyone.
Speak up, please.
Okay. The message that I think the movie is trying to portray, I will take it from that one scene that I cannot forget, when Gonzalez leans forward and he says, talk is cheap. We did the research and we can stand by the data. For me, that is a very powerful message in the movie. It doesn't matter what you've read from Google, from your friends. If the data shows otherwise, you should allow it to inform your decisions.
Thank you, Patrick.
So to me, the message was that food development or engineering, whatever you call it, is an iterative process, and we're developing new tools as we go along. And what we decide is the limit really depends on what we feel comfortable with, whether we say it's technology that we had in 1900 or in 1940 or in 1980 or in 2020 or beyond. Where do we set the limit is really what the discussion is about and what we feel comfortable with.
Well, to me, the movie came out at a really interesting juncture in history in terms of false facts. And to me, it's a lot more than GMO. I hope make everyone reflect on where am I getting my own information from, and is it actually based on scientifically objective data?
Yeah, I think also where sort of information comes from, I thought one of the really interesting comments that was in the movie that really sort of struck me like a bulldozer was when someone who seemed like a very intelligent person said that they especially trust information that they get from a blog post as opposed to information that they would get from a scientist or from their doctor. So I think the issue here is an extremely difficult situation. The other lesson I think that I got from the film, or what took me back from the film, was this idea that, you know, these anti-GMO activists were using fear to sort of make their point. And then I thought a little bit, to criticize the film a little bit, if you get to the end, I think we're starting to use a little bit of fear to make the pro-GMO point. When you look at how important it is to farmers, like in Africa, to use this technology, I think we need to be careful about sort of, showing how difficult it is for these farmers. And we don't want to use that same fear to sort of make our point, since the real message here, I think, is the importance of science and how that's where we want our decisions to come from.
To me, most of the technologies that improve the world have come from Western countries or developed countries. Talk of phones, talk of tractors that work the farm, everything. Why are the same people denying us some kind of technologies? This was a message that was aired by a farmer from South Africa. Every decision that Americans are doing is actually killing someone in another country that needs some technology. The second thing that struck me from the movie is normally when you deny one option, there's another option that people turn to. Right now in Africa, we are resorting to ultrazine, 2,4-D, a more dangerous herbicide than glyphosate, which is much safer.
Thank you all. And now we turn it to the audience. So how it's going to work, we're going to have one person decide, roving with the mic. They're going to help you hold the mic, and we hope you can feel comfortable with that. And we'll take 4 questions, round 1, then the panel discussions, respond to those. After that, we'll take another round, and we hope to do like 3 rounds. So I wait to see the first hand. Okay. And then here. Yes, so you say your name and your question.
My name is Tony Del Plato, and I've been following the debate at Cornell for well over 20 years. I'm a cook. I'm a very elemental science. I deal with fire and I reproduce my dishes every day, and if it works, the science of my cooking is successful. I think this film was a very effective piece of propaganda, but I follow the debate in science, and I think one dishonest element of this movie was that Dr. Vandana Shiva is an environmental activist, she's an author, she's also a biologist, she's a scientist. There's no consensus on the science.
What's your question, sir? What's your question, sir?
Yeah, I'm coming to my question, which I don't know if anyone has read the recent issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association, but since 1993, the amount of glyphosate in human beings has dramatically risen. Okay? It correlates with the continued broad use of genetically modified crops and glyphosate.
Your question, sir, please.
I'm getting there. I mean, as you know, this is a complicated subject. As a cook, I'm trying to understand that. I trust the scientists, and there's no consensus. My question, we know that the World Health Organization has said that glyphosate is a probable toxin and is carcinogenic. In light of this information, why do we continue to use glyphosate? Now, if the amount is rising, there's no way to pinpoint any of the diseases that are affecting people. But there's growing concern, myself and others, that the use of these chemicals is causing much of the illnesses, not just glyphosate, but a combination of stuff.
Thank you, sir.
What do we do? What do we do with the problem of glyphosate? Even the University of California and the California Department of Agriculture also make a statement that glyphosate is toxic. In light of that information from scientists, from doctors.
Thank you for your question. The next person is right here, and then we'll go over there. Where's the 4th hand? And then we'll come to you later.
Thank you very much. My question, my name is Kennedy Oyugi from Kenya, and my question goes specifically to Professor Alson, but maybe the rest of the panelists. Given that people are not readily changing their minds, somebody asked whether somebody has changed minds, and there was no answer forthcoming. Are we likely to see people change their minds to support or oppose the technology? And if not, is the situation going to remain as it is, those opposing and those supporting remaining the same?
Thank you. We'll go over there, and then we'll finalize with you for the first round. Is there? You've changed your mind?
So I'm more interested in strategies on how to communicate science to people, because it seems to me that we're fighting on two different camps, and we move around different information circles. We who read the science are aware of how to interpret a scientific paper, judge it by its merits, what to believe and what not to believe. Not everything that is published is to be necessarily trusted on one single-page paper. But when it comes to people, they could get it from any social network information. Someone told them there is a lot of gut feeling involved, and it seems to me that we're not effective in addressing that. So I guess my question is, how do we more effectively reach people to get these ideas across without looking like we are, I don't know, people call you arrogant if you just give them facts. So what is more effective than that? How do we change it?
Thank you. What's your name, sir?
My name is Eduardo Rico.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm McKenna Mullen. I'm a fourth generation farmer from Arizona, produce farmer, and a current student at Cornell. So my question is actually pretty similar to yours. How do farmers actually bridge the gap between this communication from the consumer to farmers? Seeing that my grandfather tries to advocate for a lot actually, but people kind of brush him off as an old conventional farmer. So my question is, how do we bridge the gap between that as new farmers and agriculturalists in this century?
Thank you. I'll ask. Thank you for the suggestion. And I think there was a question that was directed to you, so maybe we start with that, and then we'll go to the glyphosate question.
Oh, sorry, we got two. So sorry, just again, the exact question that you were asking. I was so busy on the first question that I.
My question is, people seem to be.
Oh, okay, yeah, I remember it. So I think, thank you. I just needed that little cue. So I think what the Intelligence Squared debate showed is that yes, there are some people that are adamantly supportive and adamantly opposed, and they've got their positions in the same way that maybe you have a religion that you're not going to change your mind on. But I think there are people in the middle that don't know much about this topic, that are malleable, if you will, or haven't made a decision. They've heard some stuff, and that was reflected in that 40% of the Intelligence Squared debate. And I think what happened at that debate was we didn't shift people that were against the technology at all. I think it went from 30 to 31%. But what did change was the people that were undecided around the technology. Once you locked them in a room for 90 minutes, then you could actually have a discussion around the pros and cons, and actually those people are changing. And I think often we spend a lot of time arguing with activists that have got a particular position, and in fact, where we want to target is actually just the general public, the middle people. And I do think that you can have an effect there, and I think this movie tries to address that void. So obviously science communication, where we just put out facts, arrogant and not well received, and so what works better? Well, I think science communication using movies, and so we partner with movie makers, scientists and movie makers, to tell a narrative that is, I think, more compelling to my mum than would be a 90-minute lecture, and that, I think, is where we need to try and use the communication skills of experts in the field like that to tell the story.
Thank you, Alison. Since you talked about communication, I want us to wrap up the other two questions or so that were about communication, and I think Patricia's a communication specialist. Do you have any thoughts on how effective we can be with communicating about complex science to end users and farmers? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think communication is not necessarily about the message, like you may have realized. When you give people the facts, they reject them. It's about the messenger, it's about values. So I address myself specifically to the fourth generation farmer who says her granddad is a farmer and he's advocating for agriculture and people are brushing him off. Maybe, just maybe, he's the wrong messenger. Another person can give that very message and someone will take it in. So instead of doing the same thing over and over again, look around in the messenger. You can change the messenger, maybe use someone who is more acceptable, a younger person, a woman, a celebrity. And you can also reach people on their values. What does this person value most? But how do you get to know these things? How do you know that someone will listen to the bishop and not the president? How do you know that this person values spirituality over healthy eating? By spending time with them. Communication is relationship building. You don't walk up to me and you tell me whatever it is that you want to tell me and you think I'll take it. Build a relationship with me. Build trust between me and you. And eventually, and like she said, there are some people who've already made up their mind. You're allowed to let go and say, I have failed, let me try elsewhere.
Thank you, Patricia. And then the last one was about glyphosate being classified by the World Health Organization as a probable carcinogen. Why are we still using it? Thank you.
An average farmer in the United States, how many acres of land does that farmer have? Let's assume you're a farmer like me, and in Uganda, where I come from, takes 10 to 15 man days to weed just 1 acre. And the weeds are responsible for more than 50% of our losses in terms of production. In the absence of glyphosates, we are using 2,4-D, which contains a more dangerous chemical or active reagent called atrazine, because it's not controlled. And me, practically what I do, I first use Roundup, clear the land, plant my maize or corn, and then I use 2,4-D because we do not have Roundup ready crops. As I speak today, together with many other farmers, hand weeding. You know, if you're a really hardworking farmer, you weed an equivalent of this room in a day. What is happening to our backs? Women are breaking their backs. Myself, I cannot afford to do the weeding, hand weeding. As a consequence, Africa is one continent where we never produce enough because it's not competitive to do farming with the current rudimentary tools that we have. So the Roundup ready crops came as a savior. And no one would have ever invested in that technology if there was no demand. Glyphosate is much safer, and obviously some of us who are fortunate to read or who understand science as well. We are trading a much, we are making it difficult for people to access a much safer option and going for more difficult or dangerous options. And it was even clear in the movie. Farmers are resorting to a more toxic and more dangerous chemicals because we must make a living. And in the absence of food, people are actually dying in our countries. They die because of lack of food.
Thank you, Clay. Maybe to build on your question, let me, excuse me?
You don't use the chemicals. It's a much more effective method.
I'm expounding on your question. Maybe Paul can chime in on this. Do you drink beer?
Yes.
Oh, great. I've also seen the World Health Organization classifying beer as a probable carcinogen. And why are we still drinking beer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was made fairly clear in the movie when you looked at the list of where glyphosate falls as far as its toxicity, that obviously it has some toxicity, but it's much lower than the type of chemicals that we're talking about here when you talk about something like 2,4-D. So I think that's important to remember.
Thank you. So we'll go for another round. 2 questions this side, 2 questions.
Films like Boo the Evolution and another film that I've seen recently, Boo, they all tell stories, and some films use science to tell their stories. So how can filmmakers mobilize science to make their stories more effective and more compelling?
My name is Tracy Coughlin. I'm trying to decide or figure out how do we view GM technology, and it seems like GM technology is tied up with a lot of other factors in the debate, such as pesticide use. And is it accurate to view GM technology as a tool that companies and researchers, scientists decide how to apply that technology? So for instance, you can create plants that are pesticide resistant, but with the same technology, you can also create plants that are drought resistant and have nothing to do with pesticides. Or is it all tied up as one thing that can't be viewed separately?
So what's the question precisely?
So I'm just trying to figure out how to view GM technology, and are we supposed to view it as a tool that can accomplish different results?
Thank you.
My name is Jean. I also followed the argument in the debate. The people who had not committed, the undecided people with open minds, were able to weigh the evidence and make a decision. Often we trust and we believe the first trustworthy information that we run across, and after that it's confirmation bias all the way. As Tamar Haskell said, when was the last time you changed your mind? And in doing this, we lose a certain amount of autonomy. We get stuck on an idea. My question for you is, as science communicators, can we learn or teach strategies to reopen minds, or to keep minds open after the first bit of information comes in, so we reserve that kind of absolutely committed judgment that gets us in trouble?
Thank you. There was a hand right there.
Listen, at the end, had the debate about increased or decreased pesticide use, and I felt that the movie didn't really comment in the end what actually did come of using GMOs. And I know about the usage versus the technology itself, the weapon, it's how you use it. But I'd like to know, not just from Allison, but in general, what is the more convoluted story behind the more pesticide or less pesticide question?
Thank you. Alison, do you want to go first since the last one was?
I wrote them on my hand this time. I'm happy to take that question. And unfortunately, that term pesticide is an all-encompassing beast, right? And so we need to break it down a little bit in order to address that. And so I think there are certain ones like the papaya and the banana that don't use anything, right? So let's get them off the table. They don't use any pesticides. The two that do are insect-protected crops, which have the Bt protein, which have dramatically, globally reduced insecticide use. I mean, it is draconian, the decrease in insecticide use. And insecticides tend to be the more dangerous chemicals. And so that's undisputable, but that's often left off the table when having this discussion, and everyone focuses on the herbicides, which kill weeds. So insecticides kill insects, herbicides kill weeds, fungicides kill fungus, etc. Let's then focus only on this one particular application, which is herbicide-resistant crops. I wish we could get beyond that discussion. What the movie tried to do is say, there are other uses for this. Disease resistance doesn't use anything. But if we're going to focus on that, then okay, let's go to the herbicide-resistant crops. And what you find there, as was mentioned by our farmer here on the panel, who I think I love having a farmer on the panel, is that what it is enabled to happen in the United States is a transfer from more toxic, more persistent herbicides like 2,4-D to glyphosate. which is the least toxic herbicide that there is available. And I think that that substitution effect has dramatically reduced the amount of toxic persistent chemicals that are used in the food supply. So on a global perspective, it has had a decrease.
Excuse me.
If you look at the scientifically peer-reviewed data, there has been a dramatic decrease in the use globally of insecticides and a substitution to glyphosate, which has enabled the use of no-till farming. So it's a complicated answer to your question, but to the person that asked, is it a tool? Yes, it's a tool. You can use it for something that's got nothing to do with pesticides. And we can't at the moment because of this debate. And this debate is getting in the way of using it for really beneficial applications that I think fit with all production systems, including agroecology, things like disease-resistant plants.
Thank you, Alison. Let me pass that to George. George, there was a question on how we can mobilize, how do we mobilize science to tell more compelling stories?
So as a scientist myself, I often just feel that I'd like to focus on my research rather than trying to sell my research. Exactly. And in turn, I think we need to focus on making our research more accessible. So most of the writing that I do is in scientific journals, which may or may not be read by other scientists. But instead, I would focus more of my writing on more popular science, you might say, making science accessible to people who don't necessarily do science for a living, and increasing the understanding of science, and thereby increasing the acceptance of science.
Thank you, George. And lastly, there was a question on how do we, it was from Jen.
Reopening minds.
Yeah, reopening minds. Do you want to respond to that? Alison?
The science communicator.
Paul, you want to? Maybe.
I mean, I think to your specific question is how do you reopen minds? I think a lot of people come to this particular topic with certain preconceived notions, like that it's increased pesticide use and Monsanto controls everything. And I think what we tried to do with this movie is say, actually, this is a breeding method that can be used for different purposes, disease resistance, for example. It can be developed by university researchers like the guy at Hawaii or like the Ugandan scientists, and it doesn't need to be involved at all with pesticides. And can we break down this blob of GMOs into a tool that can be used for different purposes? And are some purposes more easily explained and potentially maybe even supported by people that might be opposed to glyphosate-resistant crops, but why not allow the use of disease-resistant crops? And I think, once you start to open and have a little bit of a more nuanced conversation, then there might be applications that are acceptable to some and some that aren't. But at least you've got beyond the GMOs are bad forever onwards. Don't even want to talk about it discussion.
Thank you, Alison. Did you cover that?
The very first question was about movies, and so I don't know, does someone else want to take that?
Georgiana is the one who responded to the other question. So we're going to go to the last round of questions. And if you want to talk again, it is okay. Raise your hand, we shall pick you. But don't disrupt someone when they're responding. So there's a hand here, and
These two hands.
Yeah.
5.
So we'll do first. I'll take that. You'll have to wrap to right someone. Yeah, I can give you my hand. Yeah, and then we have 2 over there. So we'll start here, there, and then 2 that side. Your name and question. So we'll start from the right side, right there.
Are you going to look right now? Hi, I'm Linda. First, I want to point out in the movie that when you showed the studies that were funded by the organic industry, you really should have balanced that, because we are well aware there are studies that are flawed deliberately, and I'm sure that on the other side that's done too. And that's something science is suffering from. If I want to prove my cholesterol lowering drug works, I'm going to feed you a lot of cholesterol reducing food before using the drug. I don't want to give a really bad study on it. So you really should have presented both sides of bad studies.
Thank you.
think that's a question to the film directors. I don't know if anyone on this panel discussed.
Do you agree that that's probably perception of science? That when you say trust the data, you have to realize that we know that all data isn't honest. So you should address that.
So what's the question precisely? Alison.
Yeah, when you said in the movie, trust the data, I mean, you have to say more than that, because we've learned not to trust all data. So we want you to say something.
Thank you. And then there was another hand on this side. Oh, sorry. We are checking 5 this time, so don't worry. Yeah.
My name is Linda. I've been listening for years to people speaking about pro-GMO and anti-GMO. And I think that the question is wrong. I think that as scientists, we need to recognize that anti-GMO people care very much about their health and what they're eating. And that the question that they're trying to answer is wrong, because the real question is, what are the pesticides, what are the things that are on this food that are going to hurt you? And I would like to see the world of science try to help answer that question for people in a way that recognizes their need for food safety.
Thank you.
I'm Mike Brutz. I run the analytical lab at Cornell University. I'm also a farmer. And so one thing I learned is the importance of balance. That not all one solution is for every situation. And maybe that's the question. The question be about where is GMO appropriate versus where is organic appropriate, rather than all of one and none of the other. And we are switching our farm to an organic farm. It's the right condition for us, for our particular situation. And so that's my question. Maybe we need to change this argument to, let's have both.
Thank you. There are 2 hands. Yes. Let's start with the ones at the back, and then these are fellows, so I'm prioritizing folks that are outside the fellows community.
That's right.
I hope.
Hi. I'm not used to talking to a mic. My name is David Lyon. I'm employee at BTI. And my question is about labeling. And I'm curious where either each of you actually stand on if increasing transparency in GMO production and labeling GMO foods, if that is a kind of a boon or a negative, to kind of spreading a more comfort with the idea of GM technologies in food, whether labeling and increased technology could actually help instead of hurting producers.
Thank you. And then we'll take the last one behind there. This lady, yes? You've changed your mind?
No. So my question is, as we saw on the map, a lot of places in the world, most of the world, don't accept GMOs. For the future of the GMO industry, do you think we still have growth to develop more technology, or are we going to get shot down and are we at our limit, basically? Yeah.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to start with that?
I'll start with the last question, actually, because I think it's a pretty interesting one. The focus to date has really been about whether or not GMO, what we're developing with GMO technology is safe. But now we're starting to see actually some of the beneficial technology that's coming out of GMO. Some of these foods, some of these GMOs that are higher nutritional value, things like that. So I think that's really, I'm hoping at least that consumers are going to start to see some of the benefits. To date, some of the benefits are seen by farmers, or the question has really been just on safety. And I'll try to address one of the other questions over here. And I think it goes to also this question of consensus among the scientific community. In 1994 through 2004, the National Academy of Sciences did a study where they looked at all the literature, the peer-reviewed literature on GMOs, and the conclusion at the end of that 10-year study was that there was no evidence that GMOs were not safe. And then in 2004, they did another 10-year study where they looked at 2004 to 2014, looking at all the peer-reviewed science that was out there. And again, the conclusion at the end of that 10-year study was that there was also nothing unsafe about the consumption of GMOs. So that's two of the questions.
Thank you. Alison?
Which one did you want me to go on? The question that you particularly asked about the bad studies? So I think that I agree with the scientists, which is that every major scientific society in the world has looked at all of the studies and come to the same conclusion. And at some stage, that has to be an overriding factor. And so if you bring up Seralini or one or two bad studies, let's take the 10 most egregious studies that the anti-side has ever done and the 10 most egregious studies that the pro-side has ever done, if there's such a thing. How many studies are left on either side? There's about 2,000 left on the safe side, and I would argue probably about none left on the anti-side. And most of the ones that have been done are done by independent scientists. They're not quote-unquote industry studies. And so there seems to be this conspiracy theory that somehow Monsanto has paid off the entire global academic scientific community and every regulatory agency on Earth. And I just don't think it's feasible or realistic. I mean, we never had the NAS come out and say smoking is safe. We had some rogue scientists that were paid by the tobacco industry to say that. The scientific societies never said that. And if you're going to bet against the consensus opinion of every major scientific society on Earth, that is absolutely your right, but it's a pretty high wager stakes. One that I don't want us to do on climate change or vaccines or GMOs. And I think the problem with this issue is that it happens that the safety studies agree with an industry that a lot of people don't like, and that is the biotech industry. And people can't get it out of their heads that in the past, industry has been paying scientists to say untrue things that don't agree with the consensus. In this particular situation, it happened that the consensus happens to agree with those industries, and it doesn't agree with the natural foods industry. And I think what you find is the scientists that are saying that consensus doesn't exist are not objectively looking at the weight of evidence and doing what a scientist should do, which is letting the data inform their opinion. And it's just, it's hard to swallow. You know, Mark Linus says, you know, it's like praising witchcraft. But in this case, the science agrees that there's no unique risks with this technology. And so as a scientist, no one needs to pay me to say that. That's what the data says.
You're not reading the European scientists. There are many European scientists on the anti-side.
So that's just not true.
Thank you, Alison. We'll go on to George. You want to respond?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to your question on balance and whether we can have organic food grown and non-organic food grown. To me, clearly, economic argument. We heard how much effort it is to grow food organically in the tropics. You spend a day weeding an area the size of this room. And so you clearly would say if you're a farmer in the tropics, growing using herbicides might be saving you time feeding your family. We here in this room collectively are in the top 5% or the top 1% of the wealthiest people in the world. If you consider not the country, but the world. So all of us, if we wanted to, could buy organic food. We can all afford to eat, let's say, overpriced organic food at Moosewood, which may or may not be better for us, and we can afford to pay for it. So yes, if you want to, you can buy organic food. If you feel like you don't need to, you can pay maybe less money for non-organic food, and I think that's economics, and I fully support your idea of growing organic food on your farm because you think you will make more money off of it. You probably will make more money off of it because there are people willing to pay for it. But we shouldn't take this sort of technology away from people who can't afford it, who are living on the subsistence level, who are trying to feed their families, who should have every available technology to not spend their entire lives weeding a few acres, and then being able to feed their farmers, their families, not having the excess income to maybe buy a house or a television or a car. And so I think that's where it comes in. If you're wealthy enough, sure, go organic. If you don't, use the best available technology.
We do both.
You do both.
because there's a lot of problems with the organic agriculture. So we do modified too. So that's.
And I think that's the yes and discussion is a really important one. Like, can we not do both? You know, use disease-resistant crops in an organic production system if that's the right system for that particular area. And I think I hope nothing in the movie that suggests this is a dichotomy. Yes, you have to choose one or the other. It's yes and.
Thank you all. And the last one was on to label, to be more transparent. Let in 60 seconds, do you think this will hurt or help with the situation? Thank you.
Labeling, yes, everyone wants to have a right to labeling, but in some circumstances, perhaps, maybe this country, but again, the question is, what are you trying to communicate? In a country where I come from, we are dealing with smallholder farmers, and before whatever you have produced gets to the final consumer, it has gone through hands of several people. People collect a few kilograms of everything from different farmers. By the time it gets to the final consumer, it has a collection from everybody. So where do we label from? Is it at the point of production, processing? Well, to perhaps larger communities maybe, but in our kind of farming system, it's extremely difficult. And besides, yes, if it was not safe, then you would say, yeah, it is not safe, so let's send a signal. But in the other cases, something is not, no study has shown that it's not safe. So what are we trying to communicate by labeling? So I think, well, in countries where people think, yeah, let's have this option. Like when I go to the markets here, supermarkets, you may find some labels on certain products. Those who really feel like if that's what they believe, but I don't think it's practical in some of our countries.
Thank you, Claire. Paul, do you want to chime in to give the American context on labeling?
I can try. One of the labels that we have here in the U.S. is we label things organic. So I think if you want to make sure you've got something that's haven't used GMO technology, you can buy something that's labeled organic. I think I'm right on that. Is that right? And I think the same holds true for the United States. Just for what he said. What are we trying to convey to people? I think a lot of people have really, the GMO-free or the GMO label has been a lot to do with sort of fear. I think so. I think it's really important if we want to have labeling laws that we just carefully think about what we're trying to tell the people here in the U.S. just as anywhere else.
Thank you. And at this juncture, I thank you all for your various questions and very much thank our for the good job. And I don't know, just a second. I would like to give them one opportunity to give us a take-home message. In 30 seconds, I'll start with Patricia.
My take-home is so important, I need a minute.
In 60 seconds.
I like to say that let Africa speak for itself, because we live that life, we know that life. But until recently, I don't watch TV, but when I came here, I think I watched TV for like 2-3 days. And I saw that BBC America shows movies, and I was shocked. I have never seen that. I always thought BBC was a news channel. When you want to know about the news in the rest of the world, that's where you go. CNN shows American news. And I was like, then how do these people get to know about the rest of the world? So it shocked me, but that also helped me to understand why you have the view of Africa that you have. It is very protected. So what do I want people in this place to do? Go out there, if you're really concerned about everyone in this world, educate yourself about Africa, educate yourself about me, get to know my reality, and then speak up for me. Why have I changed? Because you create the internet, you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, more than we are. You're sending out more information than Africa is sending out. And we believe you. These technologies are from you. And you have every right to advocate for or against them. And you use the knowledge that you have about me and my people to inform what you think is right for us. And sometimes that is wrong. It is biased because your community is actually much more protected than you know. So what is my take home? Educate yourself about us. Because like the South African farmers say, the decisions you make affect us. You think GMO is only about herbicide tolerance. No, the banana that we grow in my country and it has nothing to do about herbicide tolerance. So if you block the technology in the US because you think it's exposing people to dangerous herbicides, you are actually wrong. We are using it to biofortify our food. We are using it to give our bananas a chance to fight for themselves without using herbicides. Educate yourselves about us so that you become credible speakers for us. Thank you.
George, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so me, the take-home message is that biotechnology is just the next step in plant breeding, that it's another tool that we can use to improve crops, and that, you know, like any technology, it needs to be regulated. We need to come to a consensus on what's safe, but then when it is deemed to be safe, to put it to best use to make the better crops that we need.